You wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing. No apparent reason. Doctors say it's anxiety. Therapists recommend deep breathing. Everyone tells you to relax. But what if they're wrong? What if your anxiety isn't a technical problem, but an alarm working perfectly? What if your body is trying to tell you something your mind refuses to hear? Recent neuroscience studies suggest something disturbing. Your anxiety might be right. They've told you your whole life that anxiety is irrational, that it's dysregulated brain chemistry, that you're feeling fear of things that don't exist, and you tried to believe it. Took the medications, did cognitive therapy, repeated the mantras that you're safe. But deep in the night, when your body trembles for no obvious reason, part of you wonders, what if my body knows something I don't? What if that feeling of imminent danger, that visceral certainty that something's wrong, isn't a factory defect, but a detection system working exactly as it should? Because there's a difference between irrational fear and inconvenient fear, and maybe you've confused the two. Neuroscientists call this interoceptive predictive processing. Your body is constantly scanning the environment, not just what you consciously see, but patterns too subtle for your rational mind to register. Microfacial expressions, hormonal changes in the air, inconsistencies between words and tone of voice, social vibrations your verbal consciousness could never articulate. Your nervous system detects threats before you can name them. And when it detects something, an incongruence, a future danger, a truth you're avoiding, it doesn't send you an explanatory email. It sends anxiety, because anxiety isn't an error. It's code you haven't learned to translate yet. And here's what nobody tells you. Most people who cure their anxiety didn't eliminate the detector. They just learned to ignore it better. Think about the last time you felt intense anxiety. Not in therapy, not explaining it to someone later. In the exact moment it hit you. Could you identify a real threat? Or did it seem to come from nowhere? Now think, what were you avoiding thinking about that week? What conversation didn't you want to have? What decision were you postponing? What truth about your life were you dancing around? Because maybe your anxiety isn't about the future. Maybe it's about the present you're refusing to see. If you've ever felt your body knows something your mind won't admit, leave alert in the comments. Because this part of the conversation is about to get intense. Your gut has 500 million neurons, more than your spinal cord. It's connected to your brain through the vagus nerve, a bidirectional information highway that transmits data faster than conscious thought. When scientists study intuition, they discover something fascinating. Your body often knows the right answer before your conscious brain processes the question. In decision-making experiments, skin conductance measurements show your body reacts to bad choices up to 7 seconds before you consciously perceive the danger. Your body is literally living in the future. And anxiety? Anxiety is what happens when your body desperately tries to make you pay attention to this knowledge. It's the alarm ringing because you're sleeping in the burning house. In a University of Iowa study, participants played a rigged card game. Some decks were safe, others were traps. Consciously, it took an average of 50 cards for people to notice the pattern. But their bodies started sweating and avoiding bad decks after just 10 cards. They knew. They just didn't know they knew. Another study, people in toxic relationships frequently develop anxiety for no reason. Months before consciously admitting the relationship is wrong. Your body was right all along. You just decided it was crazy. And here's the part that'll keep you up tonight. How many times have you silenced your anxiety with logic, only to discover 6 months later it was warning you about something real? So let's reconsider everything they taught you about anxiety. What if the problem isn't that you have too much anxiety, but that you're listening too little? What if every time you took medication to calm down, you were just turning off the smoke detector while your life caught fire? What if the reason cognitive therapy sometimes fails isn't because the therapist is bad, but because they're teaching you to argue against the only system telling you the truth? You don't need less anxiety. You need better translation. Because anxiety isn't the problem. Anxiety is the solution trying to happen before you're ready to see the question. And maybe the cruelest thing we've done to anxious people was convince them they're broken, when actually, they're the only ones still listening. Here's the sentence I want you to keep. My anxiety isn't a factory defect. It's the fire alarm working while I insist everything's fine. Read that again. Your anxiety doesn't need to be cured. It needs to be heard. And maybe the reason you feel so alone in this is because we live in a culture that idolizes calm and pathologizes vigilance. A culture that tells you to relax while the world burns. That sells you mindfulness while ignoring the real reasons you can't breathe. You're not weak for feeling. You're brave for still paying attention. If this is messing with you, you're exactly where you need to be. Because from here, it gets more true. And truth always hurts before it liberates. You learned to silence your anxiety long before you knew you were doing it. When you were a child and felt something was wrong, in your home, at school with that person, and nobody believed you. When you said, "I'm uncomfortable," and they told you you're exaggerating. When your body screamed danger, and the adults around smiled and said, "Everything's fine." So you learned, my feelings lie. My body is wrong. Reality is what others say it is. And you started building an entire system of internal discrediting. A courtroom in your head where anxiety always loses the case, not because you're weak, but because childhood survival depends on trusting adults more than yourself. And that survival mechanism, it never turned off. You just grew up and now you're using it against yourself. Ignoring your anxiety saved you when you were 8 years old, because a child who constantly questions adults doesn't survive psychologically. So you developed a superpower, the ability to doubt yourself faster than others doubt you, and it worked. For a while. But now you're 30, 40, 50. And that self-silencing system is still running in the background. You feel your job is destroying you. Anxiety says leave. You respond, "I'm exaggerating." You feel your relationship is wrong. Anxiety says this isn't love. You respond, "I'm too demanding." The mechanism that protected you from toxic external validation now protects you from true internal validation. The prison isn't the anxiety. The prison is the reflex to discredit it. And you're locked from the inside. Let's talk about what happens when you become expert at ignoring your own alarm system. You stop leaving relationships that hurt you because you can no longer trust the pain is real. You stay in jobs that drain you because you've convinced yourself your discomfort is dramatization. You make decisions based on logic that contradicts every fiber of your being and then wonder why nothing feels right. People think untreated. Anxiety leads to paralysis. But there's something worse. Silenced anxiety leads to action in the wrong direction. You move. You're productive. You make choices. All of them against yourself. Because when you turn off internal GPS, you don't stop driving. You just drive faster in the wrong direction. And then one day you wake up and realize, I built an entire life based on not believing in myself. There's a grief nobody prepares you for. The grief of discovering you were right all along. Grief for the decisions you made doubting yourself. For the years you spent in wrong places because you couldn't trust the discomfort. For the time lost. Proving to yourself your body was lying when it was screaming truth. And maybe the hardest part is realizing nobody did this to you on purpose. It wasn't malicious. It was just an entire culture teaching you to distrust your own experience. But you don't need to carry anger. You just need to feel the sadness of having been taught to betray yourself. And then, you need to choose differently. If you're still here, part of you already chose. Part of you is already ready to hear what you always knew. And now you're here, in this strange space between who you thought you were and who you might be, not healed, not fixed, just aware. Aware that your anxiety was right more times than wrong. Aware that you built a life ignoring your own alarms. And this awareness doesn't come with instructions. Doesn't come with immediate relief. It comes with a question that wakes you at 3 a.m. Now what? Now that you know your body is right, what do you do with all the things in your life it's telling you to change? This is the void. The space between realizing and acting. Between knowing and doing. And this is where most people turn back. Back to the comfort of doubting themselves. Because certainty about uncertainty is less scary than uncertainty about certainty. But you haven't turned back. Not yet. But there's something the void shows you if you stay long enough. What remains when you remove everything you built doubting yourself, and what remains is you, not the edited version, not the approved version. Just you with your heart still beating, your anxiety still signaling, your body still knowing things your mind takes time to process. And for the first time, maybe, you don't need to argue against it. You can just observe, without judging, without fixing. Just observing your own alarm system do what it always did, and something shifts when you stop fighting yourself. It doesn't disappear, doesn't magically calm down, but it becomes information instead of enemy. You don't need to cure your anxiety. You need to stop apologizing for it. You don't need a body that never feels fear. You need a mind that believes what the body feels. And when you finally stop treating your anxiety as defect and start treating it as data, something breaks. Not in a bad way. In the way ice breaks in spring, you realize, I'm not broken. I never was. I'm just a human with a sensitive alarm system living in a world that prefers anesthetized people, and maybe, just maybe, sensitivity isn't weakness. It's precision. You're not too anxious. You're too honest with yourself to pretend everything's fine when it's not. And that's strength. If this changed something, even if small, it's enough. Because transformation isn't explosive. It's a subtle shift in how you listen to yourself. But let me be honest about what comes after this revelation. Your anxiety won't go away. It never promised that. What changes is your relationship with it. What changes is you stop treating it as intruder and start treating it as informant. And yes, sometimes it'll still be wrong. Sometimes your body will scream danger when there's none. Because alarm systems evolve for false positives. Because in the jungle, better to run from imaginary lion than ignore a real one. But now you know the difference between anxiety that protects you and anxiety that's an echo of old trauma. Both are real. Both deserve to be heard. But only one requires action. And that distinction? That's wisdom nobody can teach you. You only learn it by listening to yourself long enough to recognize the patterns. Anxiety isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the conversation. So what do you do now? With this awareness that doesn't come with instruction manual, you return to your life. Same job, same people, same problems, but you return different. Because now when your stomach tightens in meetings, you don't ignore it. You ask, what is this telling me? When that relationship makes you anxious, you don't automatically assume it's your problem. You investigate, is my body detecting something my mind is romanticizing? You don't live free from anxiety. You live in dialogue with it, and yes, this means you'll have to make hard choices. Leave places that seem safe but are slowly killing you. Disappoint people who liked your silenced version, but for the first time, you're not choosing against yourself. And that's not cure. It's something better. It's integrity. So we return to the original question. What if your anxiety knows something? Maybe the real question is, what if you're finally ready to listen? Because in the end, anxiety isn't the problem. It never was. The problem is a culture that confuses anesthesia with peace. That sells silence when you need translation. Your anxiety doesn't need to be cured, it needs to be respected. And you don't need to be fixed. You need to be believed. By yourself. Tell me in the comments, what truth has your anxiety been trying to tell you that you don't want to hear? I'll read and respond to the first 100 because maybe you're not alone in this, maybe you never were.